again relied on its armor. But this time, it faced not just a defensive line, but a calculated ambush. A massive Russian armored convoy of 71 vehicles was advancing towards Siversk. Inside were tanks, armored personnel carriers, motorcycle reconnaissance units, and fast strike teams. All were deployed to the battlefield, but Russian commanders failed to account for one thing. The 54th and 81st Brigades were waiting exactly where they were supposed to be. 2 consecutive blows have not only shattered the Russian army's will to fight, but also swept away Putin's current grip on power. Azov's assault on the Donetsk line hit the Russian forward positions around Pokrovsk like a wave of ups and downs. When the Russians' major Donbass offensive ended in disaster, Ukraine launched a heavy counterattack. The Pokrovsk front was cleared of Russian troops. Azov units and many other Ukrainian brigades recaptured 6 settlements in Donetsk. The recapture of these settlements completely shattered Russia's occupation plan in Donbass, and the territorial gains became concrete evidence of this collapse. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky confirmed that they had achieved results on the 2 most difficult fronts, Dobropilya and Pokrovsk, for 2 days in a row. In his message, Zelensky said that he had listened to the report from Chief of General Staff Oleksandr Syrsky and that the front line was generally holding. In the same statement, Mr. Zelensky mentioned the 1st Azov Corps, the 7th Airborne Corps, the 38th Separate Marine Brigade named after Hetman Petro Sahadarkny, and the 93rd Separate Mechanized Holodny Yar Brigade. He also emphasized that the prisoner stockpile, which he referred to as the exchange pool, had grown. These statements seem to summarize the division of labor on the ground and the search for psychological balance. Russian forces had gathered near the village of Verkhnokhamyanka. 6 T-72B3M tanks, arranged in 3 rows, 3 BMP-2 armored personnel carriers, 6 MT-LB tracked tractors, 1 BEM recovery vehicle, 2 light buggies, and 12 pickup trucks linked together began moving forward. 41 motorcycles were also at the rear of the convoy. The Russian convoy's intention was to launch a surprise attack towards Zolotarivka, first catching the Ukrainian defense off guard, then pushing back the western flank surrounding Siversk. But this time, they were not facing an ordinary defense line. Ukraine's 54th Mechanized Brigade and 81st Airborne Brigade had been preparing in the area for weeks. The convoy's route had been identified beforehand, and a series of drone surveillance points and artillery coordination networks had been set up in the area. The 54th Brigade had been defending this front, which had seen some of the fiercest fighting in the region since 2022. They knew the terrain and the enemy's habits like the back of their hands. The 81st Brigade, meanwhile, was renowned for its rapid response, high mobility, and flanking maneuvers. 2 T-64BV tanks from the 81st Air Assault Brigade approached the northern edge of the riverbed and took up positions in the shade. An M113 armored ambulance was parked beside them. As soon as the Russian convoy emerged from the tree line, reconnaissance drones had already taken up positions on the hilltop. As soon as movement was detected, the first salvo arrived with 155mm artillery fire. The Ukrainian tank commander then locked onto a sudden heat signature detected by his thermal imaging system. About 90 meters away, a Russian armored vehicle was slowly emerging from between the trees. Its hull was heavily reinforced with anti-drone grills. This was a T-72B3 with improvised armor enhancements. To protect the approximately 46-ton T-72 and its 3-person crew, the grills were welded to the upper structure, along with additional steel panels. The armor protection was reinforced with composite armor and Contact 5 explosive reactive armor systems. While this reinforcement aimed to protect it from airborne FPV attacks, this time death would come not from the sky, but from the barrel of the opposing gun. The Ukrainian sniper quickly made his calculations. The T-64BV's 125mm gun was loaded with a heat round. The Russian tank's blind spot was the dome area at the rear left, where there was no armor reinforcement. After a moment of silence, the trigger was pulled. The shell struck the Russian tank's upper structure, directly beneath the turret. At the moment of the explosion, the turret was thrown aside, and the turret itself jumped half a meter upward. However, the fatal blow was not this. Despite the severe shock, the vehicle managed to maneuver backward by forcing its engine. The damage was critical, but the crew was still inside. The Russian tank could only reach a speed of 50 km/h on the difficult terrain. The Ukrainian drones, however, were much faster. Within minutes, the drone team lying in ambush on the hilltop released an FPV drone loaded with explosives. The drone flew over the trees and headed toward the Russian tank in the burning forest.
Ukraine waited for Russia's main tank attack, then crushed flanks and surprise ambush sun hung low over the scarred fields of eastern Ukraine, casting long shadows across the ground where countless battles had already been fought. The earth was broken, torn by artillery shells, tank tracks, and the weight of war. Villages once filled with laughter now stood in silence, their windows shattered, their streets littered with debris. For weeks, Ukrainian soldiers had waited in those trenches, bunkers, and hidden positions, aware that something massive was coming. Intelligence reports had warned them. Russia was preparing a full-scale tank assault, one designed to punch through Ukraine's defenses with overwhelming force. But Ukraine was not blind. Behind the quiet front lines, drones circled high, their cameras feeding every detail back to Ukrainian commanders. From miles away, screens flickered with real-time images of Russian armor massing in the distance. Dozens of T-72s, T-80s, and even the fearsome T-9OMs were lining up, engines roaring like thunder. Alongside them rolled armored personnel carriers, supply trucks, and infantry battalions, all preparing for a decisive push. The Kremlin had promised a breakthrough. Moscow's generals boasted that this attack would finally collapse Ukraine's defenses. But deep inside, Ukrainian commanders knew. They had seen this before. Russia's strength lay in brute force, Ukraine's in cunning and precision. And so, the trap was set. The calm before the storm in a concealed bunker. Colonel Dmytro studied a glowing map on the table before him. Tiny markers showed the estimated Russian advance, their columns moving slowly but steadily toward the Ukrainian line. Round him, his staff waited for orders. The silence was heavy, broken only by the occasional crackle of radio static. "Are the flanking units ready?" he asked quietly. A young officer nodded. "Yes, sir. Both battalions are dug in. They know their orders." Dmytro allowed himself a grim smile. The plan was simple yet deadly. They would let Russia's tanks come forward, pouring into what appeared to be an unguarded gap. Then, when the enemy committed fully, Ukraine would strike not from the front, but from the sides. The flanks would crush inward, surrounding the Russians in a deadly vice. It was a dangerous gamble. If the timing was wrong, if the Russians discovered the ambush too early, Ukraine's defense could be overrun. But if it worked, it could shatter Russia's armored might in a single blow.